What's gaming, gamers? Have you ever wanted to use a kinetic primary ammo weapon but are disappointed to realize that they're rarely of use to you as they hardly synergize with any build? Well, this Celestial Nighthawk build for Prismatic Hunters is the perfect build for you. Using this build, you'll be able to run any of your favorite kinetic primaries. Outbreak Perfected, Dead Man's Tale, No Time to Explain, Bad Juju, you name it, it's usable with this build. This build is designed exclusively around a kinetic primary ammo weapon to build both super and transcendence energy incredibly quickly, making for an incredibly satisfying loop between headshotting low health adds and golden gunning champions and bosses. But before getting into the build itself, I'd like to shout out our clan, the Tyrant Seraphs. If you're looking for people to play any content in Destiny with, ranging from ritual playlist and seasonal activities all the way to raids and Grandmaster strikes, feel free to join the Discord server. We welcome anyone, no matter how new or seasoned you are, and all of us will teach encounters if you don't know something. If you're interested, hop into the Discord server and play some Destiny with us, the link is in the description. To start the video off, I'll put everything I run for this build on screen as a prescriptive setup if you prefer that. Once I've done that, I'll detail everything about the build, what each build element does, why I've chosen them, and any alternative options, should there be any. If you'd like to skip to any particular section, there will be video chapters and timestamps in the description for you to make use of. For the prescriptive build setup, use the Celestial Nighthawk exotic helmet. For your subclass, run the Golden Gun Marksman Super. Run the Gambler's Dodge, whichever jump you prefer, the Void Snare Bomb Melee, the Stasis Duskfield Grenade, the Void Stylish Executioner aspect, the Stasis Winter's Shroud aspect, Facet of Dawn, Facet of Devotion, Facet of Grace, Facet of Hope, and Facet of Purpose. For the Episode Revenant artifact, use these mods: Concussive Reload, Rapid Impacts, and Kinetic Impacts. For armor stat distribution, I have 60 mobility, 101 resilience, 32 recovery, 102 discipline, 34 intellect, and 33 strength. For the armor's mod setup, on your helmet, run 2 kinetic siphon mods and 1 heavy ammo finder mod. On your arms, run 1 bolstering detonation mod and 2 focusing strike mods. On your chest piece, run 1 arc, 1 solar, and 1 void resistance mod. On your legs, run 2 kinetic weapon surge mods and 1 recuperation mod. On your cloak, run 2 time dilation mods. For weapon choice, in your kinetic slot, use the Outbreak Perfected exotic pulse rifle from the 0-hour exotic mission with the rewind rounds catalyst. In your energy slot, use the Indebted Kindness arc rocket assisted sidearm from the Warlord's Ruin dungeon with lead from gold and volt shot. In your heavy slot, use the Edge Transit Void Grenade Launcher from the Onslaught activity with the perk combination of Bait and Switch and Envious Assassin. With the prescriptive build now detailed, I'll start describing everything about this build, starting with the Celestial Nighthawk helmet. Celestial Nighthawk has the exotic perk Hawkeye Hack, which causes precision final blows to grant between 1.5% and 4% super energy per kill, depending on the tier of enemy killed. Hawkeye Hack also modifies your golden gun, causing it to shoot a single bullet that deals 625% increased damage. Lastly, if you kill an enemy with your golden gun, you are instantly refunded 33% of your super's energy, and the enemy killed will explode, dealing damage to nearby enemies. This makes Celestial Nighthawk a great exotic for dealing significant damage to bosses, and with its energy refund on kill, Nighthawk allows you to use your super on champions and mini-bosses effectively at the cost of only 67% of your super's energy. Now that you know what Celestial Nighthawk does, I'll get into the subclasses setup for this build. To describe the subclasses setup, firstly the super. The Golden Gun Marksman Super is the only super that works with the Celestial Nighthawk exotic helmet, and as such, it's the only available option. As stated earlier, due to Celestial Nighthawk, your Golden Gun will be modified to shoot only 1 bullet that deals 625% increased damage. This is a 72.1% damage increase over the regular, unmodified Marksman Golden Gun, and will deal significant damage to enemies on any difficulty. Additionally, getting a kill with this modified Golden Gun will return 33% of your super's energy back to you, making for very quick super regeneration overall, suggesting you get a kill with the Golden Gun. Onto the dodge, Gambler's Dodge will, upon use within 15 meters of an enemy, grant you 130% melee energy instantly, fully refunding your melee ability. The Gambler's Dodge is chosen as it'll work to refund the Snare Bomb melee ability to ensure you can use it more often, which is a fantastic piece of utility for this build's effectiveness. Onto the Snare Bomb, when thrown, the Snare Bomb will attach to surfaces it comes in contact with for up to 3.5 seconds. If any enemy walks near the Snare Bomb, or is hit by the Snare Bomb when it's thrown, the Snare Bomb itself will explode in a cloud of smoke that lasts 5 seconds. Any enemy damaged by the Snare Bomb's explosion will be afflicted with the Weaken debuff for 8 seconds, causing any damage dealt to that enemy to be increased by 15%. Any enemy then caught within the smoke cloud emitted by the Snare Bomb will be disoriented and will have their weapon accuracy reduced for as long as they stay within the cloud of smoke. Snare Bomb applying the weaken effect is useful for multiple reasons, not least of all the 15% damage increase dealt to any enemy damaged by it. This will help your weapons and your Golden Gun deal much more damage to enemies, and will help your Golden Gun in particular to get kills in order to refund its energy. Next, the Duskfield Grenade will cause a small stasis crystal to be summoned at the location the grenade impacts a surface, along with a slowing field surrounding the crystal. The grenade's impact itself, as well as the slowing field, will both apply the stasis slow debuff. Having slow application on demand will help this build generate much more Transcendence energy, helping you to deal with mages and champions more often, but I'll talk about why when I go over the fragments. Onto the aspects. Firstly, Stylish Executioner will grant you the invisibility buff upon killing any enemy afflicted with any light or darkness debuff, regardless of who applied the debuff. Unfortunately, Stylish Executioner does only grant 2 fragment slots, which makes it a less desirable option, but none of the other 3 aspects are really good choices for this build specifically. Gunpowder Gamble requires kills with either a solar weapon, which this build isn't designed to use, or kills with elemental debuff damage, which this build doesn't apply enough of to be consistent. Threaded Spectre has been nerfed, and it adds a 0.6 times multiplier to your class ability's recharge rate. Having Gamblers dodge up as often as possible allows you to use your Smoke Bomb to apply Weaken more often, making Threaded Spectre's increase to your dodge recharge rate a non-starter for me. Ascension is the only other 3 fragment slot aspect I could see being of use, but it does consume your class ability upon its use, which is a Gambler's dodge you could have used to regenerate your Smoke Bomb. All in all, Stylish Executioner is the best option for your first fragment slot, as invisibility will help you reposition, revive an ally, collect an orb of power, or do anything you normally couldn't while you have enemies actively shooting at you. If you wanted, you could equip either Gunpowder Gamble or Ascension for the extra fragment slot, but you won't get much, if any, use out of those aspects themselves. It's up to you to decide whether the extra fragment slot is important. For the second aspect, Winter's Shroud will cause any enemy within 9 meters of you to have 60 slow stacks applied to them when you use your class ability. Additionally, whenever you apply the slow debuff to an enemy, your class ability's recharge rate is increased by 300% for 3 seconds, increasing your Gambler's dodge uptime. The slow applied by the dodge itself does help with this build's Transcendence energy gains, but I'll talk more about that shortly when I go over the fragments. Winter's Shroud is chosen mostly for its increase to your class ability's recharge rate, because, as I've mentioned, the Smoke Bomb is an essential part of this build, and having it charged via your Gambler's dodge is important for your damage output in higher difficulty content especially. Winter's Shroud doesn't just grant this recharge upon your class ability's use, however. It also allows your Duskfield Grenade to grant you the same recharge rate buff as the grenade itself applies the slow debuff. Onto the fragments. Firstly, Facet of Dawn will grant you the Radiant buff for 4 seconds upon causing damage with your powered melee ability. It will grant nearby allies the Radiant buff for 4 seconds as well if your powered melee gets a kill, but Smoke Bomb will almost never get a kill on its own, so this isn't important. Radiant being granted by Facet of Dawn is a fantastic boon to this build's effective damage output, as Radiant is a 15% damage boost to all outgoing weapon damage for its duration. Furthermore, as the Smoke Bomb itself applies a 15% debuff to any enemy damaged by it, you'll effectively deal 30% more damage to the enemy you hit with your Smoke Bomb for the duration of the Radiant effect. Facet of Dawn does come with a 10-point deficit to your strength stat, but this is negligible. As this build uses the Gambler's dodge to build melee energy instead of relying on passive regeneration, the strength stat is unimportant, and this deficit can be ignored. The second fragment is Facet of Devotion. Facet of Devotion will grant you a slight amount of extra light Transcendence energy upon killing any enemy afflicted with a stasis or strand debuff. These debuffs include Slow, Freeze, Sever, Suspend, and Unravel. Facet of Devotion is mostly chosen as this build doesn't really have any way to build light Transcendence energy actively besides the Snare Bomb melee and your special or heavy weapons if you're running ones that deal light damage. As this build is designed to have a special ammo weapon in the energy slot, its contribution to your Transcendence energy will be limited. This can make Facet of Devotion lucrative for generating extra light Transcendence energy. Facet of Devotion also comes with a 10-point benefit to your strength stat, but as I mentioned with Facet of Dawn, strength is essentially a dead stat with this build, so don't worry about it. The third fragment to run with this build is Facet of Grace. Facet of Grace will cause kills with your kinetic damage weapon to grant you an extra 2% light and dark Transcendence energy every time it gets a kill. This seems like a small number, but over the course of an entire activity, this will significantly increase your Transcendence uptime. Additionally, getting a kill with your super also grants you and nearby allies an extra 2% light and dark Transcendence energy, but this isn't as impactful as the Kinetic Weapons boost. Facet of Grace does decrease your resilience stat by 10 points, so keep that in mind when deciding what armor to run with this build. The fourth fragment is Facet of Hope. Facet of Hope will grant you a 60% boost to your class ability's recharge rate while you have any elemental buff applied to you. As long as you have any one of these elemental buffs, you will be granted Facet of Hope's extra 60% class ability generation. Facet of Hope is helpful for your class abilities uptime, and consequently your Snare Bomb's uptime as well. Facet of Hope also stacks additively with Winter's Shroud's 300% class ability generation increase after having slowed an enemy, which simply makes your class ability charge that much faster. Fifth and finally for Fragments is Facet of Purpose. Facet of Purpose will grant you an elemental buff which corresponds to your super's affinity upon the collection of any orb of power with no cooldown. As this build uses the Golden Gun super, every single orb of power you collect will grant you the Restoration ×1 buff for 5 seconds. Having Restoration ×1 applied upon orb collection is beneficial for a couple of reasons. Firstly, it will heal you for 35 health per second while it's active. This build also uses the Recuperation Like mod, which heals you for 70 health instantly upon orb collection, making the Restoration buff a further increase to any one orb of power's health increase. Second, it will proc Facet of Hope to grant you a 60% boost to your class ability's recharge rate. Both of these reasons make Facet of Purpose a fantastic fragment for this build. Unfortunately, it does come with a 10-point deficit to your recovery stat. However, as Restoration ignores recovery, so long as you're collecting orbs of power, you won't need to worry about recovery as a stat. As for alternative fragments, there are a couple. Firstly, Facet of Solitude will cause a magazine-specific amount of precision hits to proc a Severing Burst from any target damage with the next precision shot, which will act as a darkness debuff for the purpose of Facet of Devotion. Facet of Solitude applying Sever will allow you to cash in on Facet of Devotion's extra granted light Transcendence energy upon killing any enemy afflicted by that Sever debuff. This simply further increases your Transcendence uptime. Second and lastly for alternative fragments, Facet of Courage will grant your light abilities a 10% boost to their damage against enemies afflicted with any darkness debuff. This would be brought exclusively for your Golden Gun. If you were to use your Smoke Bomb on a boss, they'd be weakened for a 15% debuff, and you'd be granted Radiant via Facet of Dawn for a 15% Golden Gun damage buff. If you then threw your Duskfield Grenade at the boss to apply the slow debuff to them, your Golden Gun would be granted a further 10% damage buff. This fragment wouldn't be used often, and would require setup and actively planning ahead the usage of your super and abilities. However, the extra damage is fantastic for getting your damage number higher in raids and dungeons, or just nuking champions and mini-bosses in higher difficulty activities. Facet of Courage would also come with a 10-point boost to your Discipline stat, increasing your Duskfield's uptime, subsequently allowing you to make use of the fragment's damage boost more often. With the entirety of the subclass setup now detailed, I'll go over the Act 1 artifact mods to run with this build. I'll only be able to describe mods that are currently available during Act 1. If any mods come out in Act 2 or Act 3 that would be relevant for this build, I'll leave those in a pinned comment in the comments section. The first artifact mod to run is Concussive Reload. With Concussive Reload active, anytime you break a combatant shield or damage a boss or champion, that enemy will have a 15% weaken debuff applied to them. This allows any grenade launcher you have equipped to supplement your Smoke Bomb's weaken applying capabilities, and can allow you more freedom with the use of your Smoke Bomb overall. Use your Smoke Bomb to apply weaken to majors and elites, and use your grenade launcher to apply weaken to bosses and champions. The second artifact mod to run is Rapid Impacts. Rapid Impacts will cause rapid hits with your grenade launchers to grant you a stack of the Rapid Impacts buff. Rapid Impacts can stack up to 5 times. While you have any stacks of Rapid Impacts, you'll be granted a buff to your reload speed and your reload duration multiplier. These buffs are increased when you have more stacks of Rapid Impacts. Rapid Impacts simply allows you to reload your weapons faster while it's active, making grenade launchers much more formidable for damage phases after you've used your Golden Gun. The third and final artifact mod to equip is Kinetic Impacts. Kinetic Impacts causes rapid hits on enemies with your heavy grenade launcher to create a Kinetic Tremors-esque shockwave at that enemy's position. This shockwave deals damage to the enemy on whom it was triggered, as well as any enemies surrounding them. Furthermore, it will stun unstoppable champions, which for this build is just a nice bonus. Now that the artifact is out of the way, I can start with the armor setup, beginning with stat distribution. For stat distribution, in the top 3 stat grouping of Mobility, Resilience, and Recovery, spec into Resilience first, with Mobility second and Recovery third. Resilience will be the most important stat to spec into overall, as it dictates your total health, shields, and damage resistance. Having Resilience at its max increases your survivability in all content in the game, making it far and away the best stat for this build. Mobility is the second most important stat for this build, as higher mobility stats correspond to lower Gambler's Dodge cooldowns. By default, at 30 mobility, your Gambler's Dodge will have a base cooldown of 38 seconds. However, at 100 mobility, its base cooldown will be reduced to 22 seconds. I don't recommend going as high as 100 mobility, however. This build has plenty of class ability regeneration at its disposal, so anything between 60 and 80 mobility will be plenty. Lastly, in the top 3 stat grouping, we have Recovery. Recovery is the least important stat in this grouping, but that doesn't make it a bad stat. Recovery will decrease the duration between having taken damage and the start of your health regeneration, as well as the rate at which you regenerate your health passively. Recovery doesn't affect anything else regarding healing, however. It doesn't affect the restoration buff, the heal clip weapon perk, or any source of healing granted by your teammates. As such, with this build both using Facet of Purpose for the restoration buff as well as the recuperation leg mod for instant health, recovery isn't as important and can be ignored in favor of other stats. For the bottom 3 stat grouping of Discipline, Intellect, and Strength, the only stat that matters is Discipline. Discipline is the most important stat in the bottom 3 stat grouping as it dictates the base cooldown of your grenade ability. The Duskfield grenade actually has one of the faster base cooldowns in the game at 91 seconds, but this can be increased significantly, down to a swift 45.5 seconds at Tier 10 Discipline. Tiers 8 and 9 are good as well, granting a 58.7 second cooldown at Tier 8 and a 52 second cooldown at Tier 9. Tier 8 is as low as I'd go for this build, as the Duskfield's slow applying capabilities are a decent portion of your class ability regenerating capabilities, so try to shoot for at least that. The next stat, Intellect, is almost entirely useless for this build. All Intellect does is lower the base passive cooldown of your super. However, this build is entirely designed around the active generation of your super, and active generation isn't affected at all by the Intellect stat, making it unnecessary for this build. Lastly, Strength, similarly to Intellect, is nearly entirely useless for this build. Strength will lower the base cooldown of your melee ability, but this only alters its passive regeneration. As this build is designed to use the Gambler's Dodge to recharge your melee ability, you don't need Strength, as you'll never get your melee ability's cooldown shorter than that of your Gambler's Dodge anyways. With the armor's stat distribution now detailed, I can get into why the armor's mods are chosen as they are. For the helmet's mods, firstly the Heavy Ammo Finder mod will cause a hidden counter to be progressed upon getting weapon kills that, upon reaching 100%, will summon a lower capacity brick of heavy ammo. Primary ammo weapons increase the counter the fastest, and exotic primary ammo weapons increase it even further, making exotic primaries fantastic weapons to use in combination with Ammo Finder mods. Having multiple ammo finders equipped doesn't increase the frequency of the finder brick drops, but it will increase the amount of ammo each finder brick grants you. Next, the 2 Kinetic Siphon mods will simply act together to summon a potent orb of power upon getting multi-kills with your kinetic damage weapon. This orb of power will be useful for multiple things: super energy, health via the recuperation mod on your legs, a boost to your outgoing kinetic damage due to the kinetic weapon surge mods on your legs, and the restoration ×1 buff via the Facet of Purpose fragment. The potency of the orb only affects how much super energy the orb grants you. So, if you don't care about the super energy as much, you can swap out one of the kinetic siphons for a second heavy ammo finder if you'd prefer having more heavy ammo when collecting a finder brick. Onto the arms mods, firstly the 2 Focusing Strike mods together will grant you 13.6% class ability energy instantly upon dealing damage with your powered melee attack. Focusing Strike operates on an intrinsic 7-second cooldown, meaning that it can't be procced more than once every 7 seconds. Focusing Strike will be able to be procced often thanks to this build's Gambler's Dodge uptime, but will also be moderately affected by the 7-second cooldown. Thankfully, Focusing Strike isn't this build's main source of increased class ability generation, so you don't have to worry too much about the cooldown itself. Next, the Kinetic Loader mod will simply increase your kinetic weapon's reload stat by 10 points, as well as applying a 0.85 times multiplier to its reload duration. Put simply, this means your kinetic weapon will reload faster, allowing you to shoot more often. I will note, however, that if your heavy weapon doesn't have a reload perk like auto-loading holster or reconstruction, using a loader mod that corresponds to your heavy weapon's damage type instead of the kinetic loader could be a good option, as having to reload your heavy weapon manually reduces the amount of time you can be using your primary ammo weapon anyways. It's best to run a loader mod for your heavy weapon when it can't reload itself. If you can't fit a loader mod on your arms, or simply don't want to run one, you can instead run a Bolstering Detonation mod. Bolstering Detonation will grant you 9.6% class ability energy instantly upon damaging any enemy with your grenade, with a similar but separate 7-second cooldown to that of Focusing Strike. Bolstering Detonation won't get to be used that often, making it unfortunately less beneficial overall than Focusing Strike or a loader mod. As such, only run Bolstering Detonation if you can't fit a loader mod in your arms. For the Chestpieces mods, simply running whatever resistance mods you need for the content you'll be running will suffice. For general low-level content, I usually just run 1 Arc, 1 Solar, and 1 Void resistance mod. But when running higher difficulty content, or any content with a threat modifier, I will change my resistance mods accordingly. In higher difficulty content, it's smart to think of what enemy type you'll be fighting against, as they generally have 1 or 2 main sources of damage. A good example of this is the Vex. The Vex have significant void damage sources such as the Laser Harpies, Major Goblins, Minotaurs, Wyverns, Cyclopses, and Hydras. As that's the case, when going into an activity wherein you'll be fighting Vex, bring 2 void resistances and 1 of a separate damage type, usually Arc due to normal Harpies and the Vex milk pools. The same goes for threat modifiers. Run 2 resistance mods that correspond with the activity's threat modifier, and run 1 separate resistance mod of a damage type you know you'll be subject to. Onto your leg mods, firstly the 2 Kinetic Weapon Surge mods will grant your kinetic damage weapons a 17% boost to their outgoing damage so long as you have any stacks of armor charge. This is a significant boon to this build's effectiveness in general, as well as ensuring your kinetic weapon scales nicely in higher difficulty content. If you don't have the space on your legs, you can instead simply run 1 Kinetic Surge mod, but that only grants a 10% boost to outgoing damage. Having 2 equipped is a 70% increase in damage compared to just 1 mod, so I highly recommend having 2 mods if you can. Next, the Recuperation mod will grant you 70 health instantly upon the collection of any Orb of Power with no cooldown. This is in addition to the fact that collecting Orbs of Power will grant you the Restoration ×1 buff for 5 seconds due to the Facet of Purpose fragment, granting you an effective 245 health per Orb of Power. Recuperation is a fantastic mod for survivability. As this build has no other major sources of healing, having Orbs of Power grant health will help you survive in all content in the game. Lastly, for your Cloaks mods, the 2 Time Dilation mods will work together to increase the duration of your Decaying Armor Charge stacks. With both Time Dilation mods active, each stack of Decaying Armor Charge will last 18 seconds instead of its base 10 seconds, an 80% increase in duration. If you don't have the space in your cloak to run 2 Time Dilation mods, it's not as big of a deal as the weapon surges on your legs. 1 Time Dilation mod increases the duration of each Decaying Armor Charge stack to 15 seconds instead of its base of 10 seconds, which is itself a decent boost to your armor charge's uptime. Alternatively, if you find the 15-second armor charge duration of 1 Time Dilation mod to be enough, you can swap the 2nd Time Dilation mod for a Reaper mod. Reaper will cause your next weapon final blow within 10 seconds of having used your class ability to instantly summon an Orb of Power. Reaper does have an intrinsic 10-second cooldown with 1 mod equipped, meaning you can only be granted this Orb of Power once every 10 seconds. It's entirely preference which you use, and in add dense activities wherein you'll be able to generate your class ability energy quickly, Reaper may actually increase your armor charge uptime more than a 2nd Time Dilation would. As such, it's entirely your decision which to run, but for general use I prefer Time Dilation. Additionally, if you can fit one onto your armor, a Bomber mod is a good mod to equip as it'll grant you 10.5% Duskfield Grenade energy instantly upon the use of your class ability. Bomber does have an intrinsic 7-second cooldown, meaning it can only be activated once every 7 seconds. Fortunately, this build won't be regenerating the class ability more than once every 7 seconds anyways, so you'll effectively have this 10.5% grenade energy every time you use your Gambler's Dodge. With armor now detailed, I can get into the weapons section of the video. I'll first go over my prescriptive setup for specific weapons, and while I'm doing that, I'll give more generalized recommendations that should suit players who don't have specific weapons, specific roles, or just don't like using a certain type of weapon. In the kinetic slot, I'm always running an exotic weapon in this slot with this build specifically. In the gameplay you're seeing in the background, I'm using the crafted Outbreak Perfected exotic pulse rifle, which is acquirable via the 0-hour exotic mission with the catalyst perk Rewind Rounds. It's an incredible weapon and is actually my personal favorite weapon in Destiny, going all the way back to the Wrath of the Machine raid from Destiny 1, but that's unimportant right now. What is important is that Outbreak Perfected is a weapon that thrives on precision kills, which is exactly what you need to get the most out of the rest of this build as well. Furthermore, the Siva nanites summoned by the weapon, damaging enemies, count as kinetic damage. This means if the nanites themselves get kills, they'll proc the Facet of Grace fragment to grant you additional Transcendence energy. The nanites do get kills often, even in higher difficulty content, and especially when solo, making it a noticeable increase in Transcendence uptime. As far as other weapons you can run, as far as exotics are concerned, anything precision oriented will work. Ace of Spades, Bad Juju, Dead Man's Tale, Hawkmoon, No Time to Explain, Wishender, and more. There are plenty of options available to you. I don't necessarily recommend running a legendary kinetic weapon in this slot, but if you do want to run an exotic elsewhere, I'd recommend running anything with either Demolitionist, Kinetic Tremors, or both. Demolitionist will simply increase your Duskfield Grenade's uptime, and Kinetic Tremors will allow your weapon to deal even more damage as long as you're hitting the same enemy multiple times. Overall though, exotics will serve you better in this slot, so try to run one if you can. In your energy slot, as the kinetic slot has a primary weapon, run a special weapon here. I generally run the Indebted Kindness Rocket Sidearm from the Warlord's Ruin dungeon with the perk combination of Beacon Rounds and Volt Shot. However, the Aberrant Action Solar Rocket Sidearm from the episode Echoes is also a great option for the energy slot if you don't have the dungeon key or don't have a good roll of Indebted Kindness. Rocket Sidearms are a great special ammo weapon, as they deal good damage, work at most ranges, and are easy to use. Most special weapons have some trade-offs in any one of those 3 categories, but Rocket Sidearms kind of do it all pretty well. So my recommendation would be to either run Indebted Kindness or Aberrant Action. Rocket Sidearms did just have their reserve ammo reduced slightly, but this shouldn't be too big of an issue overall, as you'll be using your primary weapon most of the time anyways. However, if you don't like Rocket Sidearms, or don't have any, Fusion Rifles would be my recommendation as a second option. They don't have quite the range that Rocket Sidearms can have, and their ammo reserves are generally worse. But they deal great amounts of damage within their optimal range, and as this build will mostly be using ranged primary weapons, having a good close to mid-range burst damage option can be helpful. I don't recommend shotguns or sniper rifles generally, as their use cases really don't mesh with this build specifically, but you could get away with either one depending on how you play. Lastly, for your heavy weapon, during episode Revenant, I'll be using my bait and switch and envious assassin edge transit from the onslaught activity. Episode Revenant's artifact has a few mods that are specifically dedicated to grenade launchers, and as such, grenade launchers should prove especially potent in all content in the game. As the artifact buffs grenade launchers, I'd simply recommend just running a grenade launcher instead of rockets or linear fusions. As for which grenade launchers you can run if you don't have edge transit, there are the A Cosmic Void Grenade Launcher from the Festival of the Lost, which should be available when that event rolls around, the Caraxes' Distress Strand Grenade Launcher from the Root of Nightmares raid, and the Marcillian Sea Solar Grenade Launcher from the World Drop weapon pool. Out of all of those weapons, Edge Transit is probably the easiest one to get, so head over to Commander Zavala in the tower, attune to Edge Transit, and run some Onslaught. With the rest of the build now detailed, I'll get into some tips and tricks I have for running this build to its highest potential. Firstly, aim for precision kills as often as you can, as they'll benefit both whatever kinetic exotic you choose to use, as well as your subclass setup and the Celestial Nighthawk helmet. Next, don't be afraid to use your snare bomb to weaken enemies. You'll be surprised at how often you can have it charged with how quickly this build regenerates class ability energy, so use it whenever you need it. As far as using your golden gun goes, getting a kill with it will refund a third of its energy to you. However, you don't always have to get a kill with it. Celestial Nighthawk buffs its damage significantly, so using it on bosses is recommended a lot of the time. Second, this build will generate super energy for you incredibly quickly, allowing you to basically use your golden gun whenever you want. Lastly, for survivability, simply generate and collect orbs of power as often as you can. Recuperation and restoration ×1 will keep you alive as long as you need, so as long as you're generating and collecting orbs of power, you won't die. And that's all for this video. Thank you for watching. If you have any questions, comments, or constructive criticisms, please leave them in the comments. I read all of them and reply to all that I can. If you'd like to see more content like this in the future, consider subscribing. Lastly, if you'd like to join our clan, the Tyrant Seraphs, or simply play some Destiny with us, you can learn more about that by joining our Discord server. The link is in the description. Again, thank you for watching, and have a great day.